Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Clinically Correlate with Azfar and Vedant. We have one of our favorite returning guests today, attorney Michael Johnson, and we'll get into a very exciting topic. But before we delve into anything, Michael, for those of our guests and our podcast viewers and listeners who may have missed when you were around the first time, could you briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and what your firm does?
Yeah, first, thank you for inviting me back. I love you guys, and I had a lot of fun last time, so let's have some more fun. My name is Michael Johnson. I'm a lawyer. We have a law firm, Michael Johnson Legal. It's 5 lawyers spread out across the country, helping individual physicians as they evaluate, negotiate, and then sometimes enforce physician contracts. We mostly do this on the transactional side, helping individual physicians just navigate all the different types of contracts between them and their work. We do a lot of work on, traditional full-time W-2 employed positions. Okay. There's a lot of different ways to contract for your work. I'm excited to talk about some 1099 options, some, ideas, some options that are maybe not front and center all the time. Just a quick, backstory for me. My wife's a physician, a psychiatrist. And about 7 years ago, we started looking at our first, contracts. I say our lightly, obviously, but as a spouse of a physician, I feel, very, very involved with this as well. And there just wasn't enough resources out there, not a lot of folks helping individual physicians. So the purpose of my firm and creating this space is to help individual physicians navigate these deals.
Perfect. And I think in our first discussion, we really delved deep into like what a contract can look like and a lot of the basics that I think our listeners should probably approach first before listening to this episode. Because in this episode, we want to delve into a very specific type of contract. Now, one of our recent guests, Dr. Brad Bennett, his whole sort of job structure involves 1099 and individual contractor basis. The nice thing about 1099 work is that it allows flexibility with scheduling, pay structure, and of course, most of it is teleradiology, so there's a lack of commute as well. However, there's a significant amount of legwork that needs to be done to kind of set up the whole sort of process. When we're setting up our 1099, a lot of the advice that we get is, we should ideally have a corporate structure, either an LLC or an S corp, especially when someone is making, let's say, over like $50,000 to $100,000, which, if we plan to do this full time, would certainly meet that criteria. So first question to you, Michael, is like, what is an ideal corporate structure for someone who's willing to do 1099 full time? Is it an LLC? Is it an S corp? Or in your opinion, do you even need a corporate structure?
Well, I guess technically you don't need a corporate structure. Okay, you can certainly just independently contract for your work. It goes on your tax returns as personal income, and you handle it, very, very, very simply. Okay, but if you sign up for an LLC, you go online at your state Secretary of State office and you fill out the forms for creating an LLC. It's really not that bad. Okay, y'all are all brilliant. All right, you should get. I should say at the front, you should get some advice from a CPA, tax lawyer. We're not tax lawyers in our firm, okay, but we operate close to this. And for folks that need a little bit more advice, we refer to tax attorneys, okay, or CPAs. But you can set up an LLC yourself. There's some rules around naming your LLC. Okay, you can't name it in a way that's kind of fraudulent or inappropriate, but your name, MD LLC, is usually just fine, or you can pick something else. But an LLC, let's talk about what you want an LLC to actually do for you. Okay, LLC stands for Limited Liability Corporation. But in the context of independent contractor like physician work, telerads, it really doesn't operate to limit your liability for malpractice. Okay, that's your main exposure. Okay, no one's gonna walk into your telerad's office and slip and fall and sue you. Okay, no one's slipping on the on the icy sidewalk on the way into your office. So it's not really about limiting your corporate from your personal assets. The advantage comes in on more of the tax side, you can elect to be taxed as an S corp. So there might be opportunities here to deduct important expenses from your business, areas of your home. I also work from home, so I might know a little bit about this myself. So you can deduct certain expenses. You can potentially pay yourself as an employee and then potentially pay a portion of it as a corporate dividend, which might reduce your total tax income. There's some opportunities to set up what's called a solo 401k. Okay, being a small business allows you to set up a 401k like a big business. All right. And the nice thing, if you are the only employee and you are the employer, you can set it up in the most tax advantageous way allowed under law, because why not? You're the employee. So there are ways to structure this to really gain a little bit more control over your finances and how you're taxed, and try to maximize this a bit. One of the least tax efficient ways to frankly make a lot of money is to do it solely under a W-2. Like take it all, let's say you're doing a bunch of telerads and you're doing 400 to 800K. That is not crazy here. Okay. If you take it all as W-2 income, your tax burden is probably going to be higher than if you pay yourself partially as a corporation and partially as income, as salary. There are limits to how far you can go. Okay, so don't take this brief discussion as freedom to pay yourself a $1 salary and take the rest of the corporate debt. That's not how this works. All right, you need a CPA on your side that knows what they're doing in this space, but that's a good start.
Awesome, awesome. So basically, to recap, I think we got into a lot of the control where where the physician or the radiologist can start to take the control in their own hands, right? From setting up their own retirement plans to getting tax deductions, legitimate tax deductions for the equipment that we have. We have a ton of equipment that we use,
Correct.
and stuff that we use that we need, like for example, a business internet, right? So there's definitely a lot of legwork that needs to be put in, and there needs to be other professionals like a CPA, greatly involved with this process to make sure we're abiding by all of the laws.
Correct.
Excellent. So now to get into the specifics, so let's say we set up a corporate structure. Now we're hunting for jobs. We come across jobs. We're looking at different contracts, right? I have a few questions on like the specifics of the contract. Most W-2 or whether it's partnership or private practice restrict the physician from working in multiple jobs, right? Now, as a 1099, I think what ends up happening is I'll give you a common example. Like a lot of people can end up doing ED shift work, which is 7 days on, let's say 14 days off, 21 days off, right? On
Yep.
your off time, some physicians may want to pick up additional work which their current contract doesn't provide. Hence, they want to moonlight externally. Can those restrictions still be put in if I'm doing 1099 contractor work?
They can, but it's far less likely. Okay. Generally speaking, 1099 independent contractor status means that you are a small business that is contracting with another small business to perform a specific service. Okay. Usually they require only you, the physician, your one physician to perform that service. You often have a limit on subcontracting out that work. Maybe you can negotiate that depending on your contract. Okay. But because of that, there's a expectation of a little bit more freedom. So limiting your outside work, limiting what you do on your off time can be less. But I've read 1099 contracts to essentially be the same in all instances as an employment agreement, except for literally switching out a couple terms, a couple definitions in the contract, changing the title and one or two sections, and then that is that. So please don't assume just because it's a 1099 that it's safer or less restrictive. You really got to dive into the details of that contract to make sure.
Got it. Got it. So I think an important learning point here is like, the companies may not have a separate 1099 contract. They can kind of, I guess, modify their normal, let's say W-2 or partnership contract and offer it as 1099 to people who are willing to do it. Speaking of that, right, since it's a per contract basis, there can be problems with payments. Let's say the company is not able to collect from insurances.
Yeah.
Now, can we put in our contracts like, hey, look, if you don't pay me within a reasonable time frame, let's say 2 weeks, I can stop working for you. Is
Yeah.
is that a reasonable thing to have on the contract?
I really like deadlines on companies to pay you. Okay, this also goes for W-2 and bonus structures as well, but especially in 1099, let's say the payment organization, like the payment structure is you like invoice the company for whatever 30 days of work. Maybe you're paid per shift or per hour. Maybe it's a per click model, whatever it is. Maybe you invoice them on 30 days, but then there's some sort of deadline for them to pay. And I like that to be clear. I don't want you to go like 90 days without payment and all of a sudden you are 120 days in and you haven't been paid. And then now you have to stop your job and then, go after collections. That's not a fun space to be in, but that would be a good area in the compensation section, to build in some protections around, being paid timely. That's very good.
So it should be in all contracts, regardless if it's 1099, W-2, partnership.
Yeah, regardless of what it is, let's say you have an annual bonus structure that pays you a production bonus over a certain number of work RVUs in an employed contract. If it doesn't have like a hard and fast deadline, then you run a bit of a risk, right? And I've seen that happen, especially in practices that are maybe falling on some hard times financially, or there's some other like hiccup in their payment structure. The hack, the change healthcare, that the hack, caused some problems in cash flow for some small practices, even bigger employers too. But having some deadlines in there can be very helpful.
Another small question would be like, is it important to negotiate backup in this case? Say I can make it to a shift. Is that something that we should specifically put in the 1099 contract? Because again, for employees and even for partnership track folks, there's a general understanding that you'll be on backup call, or a partner or someone else can pick up the slack. I'm wondering what it looks like for 1099.
I guess it depends on the company that you're contracting with. Sometimes I've seen it where they have multiple 1099 contractors that are working with them. And if anybody is out, or maybe there's like an uptick in demand, sometimes there's like a message board or something that says, hey, is anybody available to pick up some additional work? It's actually the same. My wife does a emergency psychiatry moonlighting gig, 1099. So we have some experience in the space as well. And in practice, that's how it works. It's like a per consult basis, and there happens to be a massive influx. Then the folks working that shift will sometimes kind of communicate with each other. Sometimes it happens like through the company, and sometimes it happens through the 1099 contractors that work with the company. But yeah, that's an interesting point. I don't know that I've seen a clause about that per se many times, but I don't see why not.
Yeah, the only reason I kind of mention it is because I think a lot of the 1099 contracts that I have been seeing, on job boards, I think the ED shifts, they tend to pay per hour.
Yeah,
I mean, there are certain like an outpatient shifts or even some ED shifts that pay per study, where I think a model like that makes sense. And if someone is out, if there are multiple people on, you read more, you get paid more done, right?
sure.
However, I mean, it's a good question, right? Is there an expectation, RVU expectation, right? If someone is out, that puts more pressure on the current folks who are on, hence they may be reading much more than that they're comfortable with, for example, right? You know, but is it like too bad, suck it up, someone's out, or is it something that they can negotiate? If you read it above a certain RVU threshold, you get paid an X amount more, right?
Yeah, so I guess I've seen it both ways. I've seen it on a like per read basis. I've seen it on a per shift basis. If it's per shift, then obviously you are kind of in a nice place. If it's an ED shift that's not particularly busy, that makes it very comfortable. But if it's a per click basis on an ED shift that is not very busy, then you're maybe up probably through the night and you're not really making that much, which is a bit of a bummer. Um, I do see a bit of a theme with telerads that if you are maybe a bit of a slower reader, then it might not be the best fit. I'd be curious from some of your, your other listeners what their experience is, and to really have a more open conversation about, speed of your reading versus like, appropriateness for tele versus maybe another practice setting, maybe more of an academic setting, or doing something a little bit different. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that. I think volumes are up everywhere, academics, private practice, tele, right? Nowadays, I think what ends up happening is people just pick whatever subspecialty they're comfortable with, and they're expected to read an extremely high volume in that subspecialty, regardless of the setting, right? And so even some academic places are offering salaries that are very, very competitive with private practices, with the expectation that they'll read probably just as much, quote unquote, private practice volume, right? So volumes everywhere is up, and then academic places are offering more salary to keep up. And of course, in teleradiology, that's where, the models of pay per click or pay per study kind of comes into play. Uh, Two more questions from me. We briefly touched on this in this very, very important topic. I think non-competes in, teleradiology makes no sense, right? You can put a radius around me. If I'm working for practice in Florida, I would quit that. I would not get, work for that 10-mile radius in Florida. I'll get work in Arizona while living in California, right? But I think we briefly touched upon non-solicitation. Could you briefly go over what it is and how if there's some negotiation tactics where we can basically have that in our favor or kind of tone it down in our favor?
Yeah, so non-solicit clauses are often the biggest issue in radiology. This has been a constant theme of the practice really over the last couple months. Um, and so, well, backing up for a moment, a non-solicit clause speaks to what you can do with the valuable relationships that you develop during employment. Okay, if you're doing telerads, I doubt any patients know you, so that's really not the problem, right? The real valuable relationship is with the facility that you're reading at. Okay, if you have like a bigger telerad company, what they don't want is additional compensation or additional competition rather for their contract with that facility. And if you could take essentially you and a handful of others, band together, form a telerads company yourself, and then go after those contracts with those facilities, then that's a kind of a big problem for the company. Like that's probably their biggest financial risk. So often the non-solicit will also apply to other co-employees and other co-independent contractors with the company. You know, the general idea of like taking like your business unit or your favorite group, essentially firing the boss, creating your own company and competing for those same contracts is a real concern. So often radiology contracts will have non-solicit clauses that apply to maybe as broad as every facility that that company has a contract with. And that is consistent across 1099 and W-2, okay? Under a 1099, they might term it as a non-interference clause, but functionally it's the same thing. It's the same as a non-compete or a non-solicit. A non-interference might have a geographic limitation on interference and might have a relationship-based limitation on interference, but it is functionally, essentially the same thing. So watch out for this, especially if you're going to do telerads for a bigger organization. Let's say they have a either full service or partial service contract with many facilities, especially in a certain geographic area. If you wanted to work in person, or maybe part of your training is in more procedure based, and you want to maintain the option of working locally in person, watch out for this, because if they have a couple dozen contracts sprinkled across your geographic area, then that could be a real limitation on your ability to leave. Sometimes they'll last for a year or two. Don't just breeze past the restrictive covenants in Telerads, assuming that it's not going to apply to you, because it can. And sometimes I'll tell you, in the firm, they make me really queasy, okay? Because they can be very hard to interpret. All right. Even for lawyers that do this, we've well over 1,000 in the firm. We do this all the time. Even for us, sometimes it can be difficult to say for sure what is the scope and where this might go. Also, these companies like buy and merge and sell each other. So if it has a broad restriction on, let's say, every facility that any physician in our group has read for in the last 2 years, and then all of a sudden they merge with someone that happens to be their equal size or bigger in a market that's close to you, this could become a big problem. And the challenge too, you might want to say, well, Michael, how enforceable is that? Right? We're Telerads. Like, why should this ever be enforceable? And that ends up being the wrong question, okay? Because here's what happens in practice. So let's say you are working for a group and then you want to leave, you want to terminate that contract, you want to work for another group, okay? That second contract will probably have a clause in there that says you warrant, represent, essentially promise, legally promise that there are no restrictions on your ability to perform this job in full. Okay. Let's say there's a non-solicit clause that says that you can't do that. Okay. If you don't disclose that problem to the employer, or like plan a workaround for it from the front end, then your second employer could sue you and probably rope in the second employer under like a interference with contract type claim or something like that, and make it very difficult for you to proceed. So the second employer is probably not going to hire you if doing so would violate a prior either employment contract or 1099 contract. They also probably have the same thing in their contract, by the way. So, healthcare employers in healthcare really don't have a big motivation to help individual physicians violate physician contracts, because they want, as a matter of like internal policy, they want these to be enforceable. So while it might seem wild that this is even possible to be enforceable, you might think, well, Michael, I'll just win a lawsuit. Like, that's said by people that has never fought a lawsuit. Like, it's kind of like, yeah, I'll just win the bar fight. Like, have you ever been in a bar fight? Like, I don't know that you really want to do that without really knowing what you're doing. So I'd proceed with caution, make sure you understand the restrictive covenants.
So I guess a natural follow-up to that is then how do we turn these exit clauses in our favor? Like, what are your like favorite techniques or tactics to do so?
Yeah, a really good one is to limit the scope of the non-solicit to only facilities that you have read for. That's a good start. Okay. So at least or you should know, where you're reading and what facilities might be covered by that. You might also want to limit it to say something like only if I have read for a facility for more than a certain number of shifts or a certain type of volume. Because it depends on how your contract is organized. If you're tele and you're receiving reads from multiple locations all at the same time, that could be a little bit more difficult. But if you're like taking one shift at one location each time, then you could put in a limitation that says, or ask for a limitation based on the number of shifts like for a particular facility. So
Gotcha.
another option is the termination rights, right? If the company under a 1099 were to terminate you without cause, then I don't know. I don't think that the restrictive covenant should really be enforceable. If a company has full control over hiring you, having you work, terminating you because they want to hire somebody else for whatever reason, and they can put a bunch of restrictions on you, that's pretty rough. If you have control over it, then at least that's another layer of protection. But that's a good start.
So I want to shift gears just a little bit. This is kind of based off of a conversation that we had last time too, in terms of dollar per RVU being like a great kind of metric just to start off a conversation. And so with the 1099 setup, if you're not getting the health insurance benefits and some other benefits typically associated with an employment contract, from your experience, is there like kind of a baseline premium that you're seeing if you're trying to negotiate a contract of saying, per RVU, I want to get paid X percentage more compared to the employees in that firm?
Yeah, so really good question. I think that if you are 1099 instead of W-2, you should make some amount more. Okay. Question is how much more? So on your side, if you're looking at it from like an apples to apples comparison, okay, let's use a hypothetical. Okay, let's say full-time position, $500,000 for X number of work RVUs. You'll typically get, let's say, maybe a 2 to 6% 401k match. Let's use 25 grand, okay, as your 401k match. You're almost certainly not going to get that in a 1099. So now, the total benefit really needs to be 525. Okay. Also, you got to think about the employer side payroll taxes. On the first $160,000, more or less, you have to pay a little bit more in taxes on the employer side. If you're 1099, then you're the employer and you're the employee. So you have a little bit more tax burden there. The way it works out, ballpark it around 15K-ish more in taxes. Okay, so now apples to apples, rough estimate might be more like 540 instead of 500. Okay. Also, you got to think about the advantage of benefits, health insurance, dental insurance, maybe a little bit of life insurance, maybe something else. Okay. Some folks like really need very, very good benefits with very low premiums. Maybe they have a big family. I've got 2 little kids. Okay. So we're kind of in the middle, but we're relatively healthy. This could cost, I don't know, 20, 25K more if you have a big family. So if you're not getting those, just creating a rough estimate here, now we're at, where are we at? 565, more or less. 500 and 565 being apples to apples after payroll taxes, 401k match, and benefits. Okay. Also, as a 1099, you lose certain really important employee protections under federal law. So, for example, FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, you don't really get that as a 1099. So if you go on leave for a family medical issue, a personal medical issue, then that company now no longer has to keep your job for a certain period of time. They can offer it to somebody else. They have more freedom to let you go. Same under like Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, protected classes based on race, sex, national origin, religion, that sort of thing, sexual orientation. They have fewer, I guess, federal requirements to follow. They often also don't have to pay your workers' comp insurance. Okay. Not that a bunch of telerads are in a very dangerous business here. Okay, the premiums are probably very high for workers' comp. It's probably not that bad, but it's at least something. Pregnancy Discrimination Act, pumping time, that sort of thing. We could get really into the weeds on employment law. We'll keep it more surface, but there is some sort of advantage for employers to not have to worry about these regulations, these protections. And also, there's an added risk on your side for not really having these in place in the same way as an employee. So I think you should be rewarded financially in some way for that. Okay. On the so placing some sort of monetary value on employee protections, 565 plus something. Okay. There's some advantages though to 1099. So you can structure a 401k, a solo 401k in a very advantageous way. You have full control over it. You can invest in with a little bit more freedom than most employer plans. There's an advantage there. If you elect S corp status and you're get with your CPA, okay, don't take this brief discussion as the holy gospel, but there might be some tax deductions that you can add in. You might be able to deduct areas of your home for home office. You might be able to deduct any equipment that you're using in your practice, that sort of thing. So there might be some advantages. As an employee, your employer often funds your setup for telerads. Okay, it's a good thing to negotiate into your contract under an employee model, by the way. Occasionally, I'll run into that where they're like, no, like we funded up to a certain amount, but you got to cover the rest. And that is very, very expensive equipment, to set up in your home. So watch out for that. But if you're going to do independent contractor telerads like kind of indefinitely, and you want to have specific equipment, then you can deduct that as a business expense and get a bit of a discount there, which is really nice. So there are some certain advantages. So the way it works out generally is that you probably need about 15% plus, more or less, to make it apples to apples. Okay. Now it can be lower under certain instances. Like I'm married to a physician that has a full-time W-2 job. Okay. And we do married filing jointly for tax purposes because of student loan stuff. So whenever I add income, like employee income, to our total tax burden, from $1, it's taxed much higher because of just the nature of us being married to a physician. Same idea would kind of be in place if you have like a W-2 job that you do like mostly full time. Maybe you have a 0.8 or a 0.9 FTE job and you open up some time for telerads for moonlighting. Same idea. Your the tax advantage of doing it 1099 becomes more important when you have another rather large W-2 income in your household. So like for us in our house, it becomes more advantageous for me to own my own business and do what I do at a lower income threshold. So keep that in mind. You got to think about the entire family as well. But that's a good starting point. That's not everything, though.
No, I love that answer. Like you said, even if it's like a rough ballpark of 15% or 20%, and I guess the key point is like run the numbers on your specific situation, because it also depends on like the tax rates for wherever you are and what kind of specialty you're doing. And it almost just sounds like, the conversation of renting versus buying a house. The short answer is it depends, and like it really makes a difference of where you're located in your own personal circumstances. And it's just kind of making sure there's no one gospel that you're following, but then like just running the numbers to see if it is worthwhile for you. And then, even to the point of is 15, 20% enough, you're also taking on that risk of being an independent contractor, getting those contracts, and almost like the business value of doing so probably bumps it up as well. But at least you kind of have an idea of like, if it's below a certain percentage, it's not worth it. And maybe, the employment contract on so good because the market's so good and they know they have to like recruit people that way that it's bumped up. But if there's ever a point where it's like, well, they're not keeping pace with it, now you know exactly how to compare to see if an independent contracting position, whether like you said, a side gig or your full-time job, is like the best option.
Absolutely. Another little side tangent here, for health benefits. Look very closely at high deductible healthcare plans and then going like cash pay concierge for your primary care. We do this in our house, and like if you can get out of insurance, then it can get really, really nice. Like I love the relationship with our primary care doctor. She's IM peds, so she can see my kids all the way up to us indefinitely. And I could literally like call her and text her now. I guess it's a little bit late in the evening, but I'd get with her tomorrow and get seen same day with my doctor. And that is really hard to do if you have insurance, and if you're seeing a primary care doc in, a really big system, then all of a sudden you might end up in a more of an urgent care model. So there are some advantages to, structuring it this way that can add additional value.
100%. You talked about benefits, and what you can negotiate or not. The other part, and we kind of tangentially talked about it, is like malpractice, and then especially with tele of possibly working in multiple sites. So I guess it's like a two combined part in terms of like malpractice in multiple states, and then also in terms of credentialing in multiple states. What has been your experience or any resources that you have that you found useful to kind of navigate all that?
Yeah, so for insurance purposes, you can structure your 1099 such that the company provides your malpractice insurance. Just because you're 1099 doesn't mean you have to pay your own malpractice insurance. Really just depends on how they set that up. But I encourage folks to not freak out if the company doesn't provide this. Get a quote from an independent broker that does this regularly, okay, and see what it would cost. And then add that into your kind of cost structure, part of our analysis that we just did, and see what would be, what would be appropriate. How does it work out? Does it make sense for you to take that on or not? I think sometimes these costs get overestimated because of, just maybe not understanding, not knowing how much it is. Folks might think, well, if they go pay malpractice tail, then it's impossible for this to make financial sense. Like, pause on that thought, get a quote from an independent broker, and see what comes of it. I can provide a link in the show notes for someone that we regularly refer. We don't have a financial relationship with them or anything, but there's a couple other groups out there as well.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So it's been about a year or so since we last talked. You've had some exciting news that you've been developing. Can you tell us a little bit about the physician contract course that you're about to launch?
Yeah, so really fun project. I wanted to add an educational opportunity in addition to the Instagram, right? Love the Instagram profile. We get to share a lot of tips and like basic information in 90-second increments on Instagram, but I wanted the opportunity to dive deeper, to give physicians an opportunity to take a course. This is a 9-hour course that really teaches in a more deeper way about physician contracts, how they work, how they're structured, how to use them to create more autonomy and control over your career goals and your life plans, okay? At its core, they are simply a tool for you to use to control your career. And there's not enough education out there for y'all, okay? Podcasts like this really help close the gap. So thank you guys for what you're doing. But I wanted to go even further. And there were so many conversations that we had during initial evals in the firms, in the firm, with clients that I felt, okay, if they would have had this background knowledge, this information, maybe they would have picked a different practice setting, okay? Maybe they would have gathered a little bit more useful information for us during the interview process, all right? Maybe they wouldn't be concerned or felt a little bit out of place when talking to a CMO, to talking to the CEO of the company. They would felt prepared. So that's the goal of the course, Mastering Physician Contracts, physiciancontracts.com. I'm not very subtle with the names, but it's really there. Take it over a weekend, okay? Before you start interviewing, it's never late to learn about physician contracts, okay? But a lot of your viewers will be, residents and fellows looking to, transition out soon. Spend a weekend, take the course, do it with your spouse, to your partner, whoever you have as well, and really use it to do some deep thought work about what you want this next step in your life to look like, okay? Y'all deserve control over medicine, over your careers, and I'm hopeful that the education there will help you gain that. and help you make, really good decisions right out of the gate. I think that physicians that are informed on the business and legal side of medicine are able to practice better, able to help more patients, are able to improve medicine as a whole. And I'm just excited to try to be a part of that and to help you all grow.
That's awesome. I think, where all of us have like aligned from the first time we met each other was the fact of, empowering physicians to, kind of understand the landscape and then take back from, the independence that used to be there. And especially as like healthcare in general has gotten more complex, there's larger organizations, the decrease in private practices, the decrease in independent practices, all these have kind of made it that like there's just fewer and fewer people, even say 10 years above us, who know these steps. And then it's almost like a lost generation because it's like the 50 to 70-year-olds that may have had an independent practice at some point, and now there's this big gap. And I think we've learned so much from like all of these podcasts, and I think like hopefully our viewers do too. But it really is that passion of ultimately bring that education to the individual person so that they can just make the best informed choice that they want. But then hopefully over time as well, like if there's say technology between can kind of ease up the administrative side, and then knowledge like these courses can make it so it's not completely daunting, and you're not just reliant on residency and like the structured curriculum to teach you exactly what you need to know, because oftentimes I don't know if they know what like we need to know, right? Unless you're like staying in academics. So like it's honestly awesome, and it's like I think that's like the beauty of the internet too, and podcasts, YouTube, whatever it is, of like just giving you individualized learning to exactly that subgroup of people. So I mean, thank you so much for doing it. I think both of us are definitely going to do it just because we've already had amazing conversations with you, and really kind of excited to learn it from a structured standpoint as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a really fun project. Allie's gotten involved with it a lot. She really enjoys it. So you'll see her input. My wife's name is Allie, by the way, but you'll see her input quite a bit. And I've tried to create a course that doesn't sound like a law lecture. It sounds like us. It sounds like when we're talking, and it's supposed to be accessible and understandable, digestible for physicians, for their partners, for others involved in medicine to really understand what's going on in the background. I'll tell you, in the background, administering healthcare has become so complicated. There are so many moving parts, so many regulations, just so much going on that in many ways we've just lost touch with what medicine is really at its core, and it's physicians helping patients. I go to health law conferences, and we talk about all these very complicated federal laws, state laws that regulate what physicians can and can't do, and how they impact companies, but there's really not a big voice out there for how all this impacts the physician experience. Maybe some discussion about patient care and quality to the extent that it helps a business grow and be profitable, but we should spend more time making sure we understand how our healthcare system impacts physicians. And I think that more physicians that are informed, understand what's going on, maybe get more into policy, more into advocacy. Okay, the stronger the voice out there, I think the better it is for everyone, for physicians, for patients, for just the macro level administration of healthcare. And if this course moves the needle in the right direction, I feel very happy, very pleased with that.
Love it, love it. I'm super excited for it. We'll definitely include it in our show description, and hopefully more people can check this out. So I think it's going to be amazing. Thank you so much, Michael. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Michael, thank you, man. It was awesome. Of course, always good to learn from you. And I think for personal and professional satisfaction, there are three things that all physicians should learn before, or at least residents and trainees should learn before they graduate. I think number one is contracts, and in no specific order of importance, contracts, taxes, and investing. I think there's a decent number of resources on investing. Along with that kind of goes, taxes, taking advantage, but not enough on contracts. And I think this will be a really good first step into really taking control of our professional lives. Because after, for us, you would be, 9 years, 10 years for those who are doing fellowship, right? Would have our first quote unquote contract where we have some negotiating power. We had
Yes.
zero negotiation when we signed our residency contracts or even fellowship contract that I'll sign when I go to fellowship. Having no preparation in it is daunting, and that's how I feel like physicians or anyone really gets into unfortunate and unhappy situations. And the more we learn about it, at least the basics through your course, for example,
Yes.
the more we can start to take control and ask good questions for when we come to professionals like you for help. Kind of start speaking the language in and of itself. And so I feel like even that's why it's important to have some sort of a background, and I feel like your course can provide that.
Thank you so much. Everyone deserves to be informed. That's the core. You're all about to negotiate a multi-million-dollar contract. Both of you will make much more than $1 million in the first 5 years of your post-training life. Okay. When you're negotiating contracts with that much at stake, you deserve to be informed, and that's what we're here to do.
Awesome, Michael. Well, always good to have you on, man. We'll have you on again in the future. Always
Please do.
a learning episode for both of us. I had to go back to our last episode 2 or 3 times just to kind of get all the points down to make sure we ask different questions. But it's awesome. Thank you so much for being so friendly and answering all of our questions. We'll have a link to your course in the description below.
Good to see both of y'all. Thank you so much for the invite. Keep doing what you're doing. It looks like a lot of fun from the outside, and keep going. Thank you.
Take
Thanks.
care, Michael.